Howdy everybody, David Meakin here, starting player with Connect More, and welcome to another very special edition of Avoid the Rules, a video of instruction and demonstration that helps ease rule understanding and learning. Easy start. And today, the reason why it's so special is for three reasons actually. This is the very first video I've done for 2014, and I hope to do a lot more during 2014, so woohoo, we're getting started. Plus, the second thing that makes me really excited about this video is a video of my most anticipated game of the last half of last year, last half of 2013. In fact, this has been my most anticipated game since Yido. Now that's saying a lot. So this game that I'm going to feature today is Freedom, the Underground Railway by Brian Mayer. The reason why I've been looking so forward to playing this game is one, it's a cooperative game, and I've really grown to love the cooperative genre, especially with how rich and thematic that they're starting to get. Robinson Crusoe, love that game. And I also really love the more simple cooperative games like Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert. Those ones are so great to play, especially with new players, to play with them because you're able to kind of show them and teach them a game as you play along. And that's the other really awesome thing about this particular game. Although my video, the actual instructional bit, is going to be around 35 minutes long because I try to cover all of the rules in that video. But honestly, if you want to get started with this game in your game group, this is all you need to know to win. Is first of all, you're going to be given a card. It's going to tell you how many slaves you need to free. Free them. The second thing you're going to need to do is you're going to have support tokens. You need to buy them all. Buy them all. You do those two things, finish the round that you played, you win the game. Woohoo! You don't do those things, you run out of time, or there's other things that might happen. You might lose a lot of slaves, you lose the game. The rest of the game can be taught as you play. So there, that's all you need to know. For the rest of you guys that want to stick around and actually watch all of the kind of rules going as I go through them, please stick around. I highly encourage it. I would love to show you my views on the game. I give you a little bit of flavor and talk about the game as I go along as well. The other reason why I've really been looking forward to this game is if you have not read Brian Mayer's book, I can't even remember the name of it right now. How embarrassing. But it's basically Games and Libraries. Fantastic book. I got it on my Kindle and I read it. And if you ever need ammunition or discussion points for why board games need to be incorporated more into corporate lifestyle, into community, family lifestyle, it is just a beautiful summary. It's a beautiful book that summarizes all of these things together. And honestly, like if you're on Board Game Geek, you're going to find a lot of these same points out there. You're going to find these things, but he does such an excellent job of condensing it all together and putting it in a very logical and logical way that you can actually go through and it makes sense, and it kind of condenses all of that together. So it's an excellent book. So honestly, as soon as I saw that he had made a game, I was immediately on the Kickstarter. I was so excited to get this game. Third reason, if I'm still on that list that I started maybe 2 minutes ago, that I was really excited about doing this video is my wife wanted to play with me, and so the actual walkthrough video I've been doing of showing all the rules, she was actually there and I was actually teaching the rules to her as I was going along so that her and I could be playing. And so we're actually playing a two-player game right now. And yeah, I just absolutely love it. So, in fact, my resolution for 2014 is to free 100 slaves. So I'm well on my way. Well, not really, because a two-player game, you don't free too many. But without further ado, you came here to watch the rules, and please stay tuned for my final thoughts afterwards. As you can tell, I'm pretty excited about the game, and I hope you will be too by the time you're done. Thank you very much, and I'll catch you after the Avoid the Rules section. Thanks. Okay, let's get started with Freedom, the Underground Railroad. And today I actually have a very special guest. I'm actually teaching my wife right now. And so I decided, why don't I just film this while I'm teaching her, and then that way I can post it up and you guys can all benefit from it as well. So although it's only going to be her and I playing a two-player game, I'm going to get started and show you guys the setup for a four-player game and go through all of the different victory conditions and the different things you need to change based on the player count as we go along. But anyhow, why don't we get started? Like any game, the first thing I like to know is, well, how do you win the game? And like any cooperative game, there is usually only one very specific way to win and many ways to lose. So let's first look at the first way to win. Is you're dealt at the beginning, you have a choice of these different cards, and basically it's determined by your player number. So you see in the top left corner you have 1, 2, 3, and 4 player cards. And so in this particular example we're playing with 4 players, so you take that card and you discard the rest. And when you look at the card, it actually gives you your victory conditions. And so there's actually an easy side and a challenging side. So we'll stick with the easy side because this being, this is, I've played this game several times before, but being my wife's first time, let's stick with the easy side. So the victory condition is at the very, very top. You have to free 22 slaves, and so we'll put that up there. That's our victory condition for us to keep in mind. And the space below, again, this is one of these places, one of these ways how you can lose the game is these are all the slaves that might be lost along the way that don't quite make it up to Canada. And the way that this works is once you fill up all the spots, you have not yet lost the game, but should you need to add another slave to this space, a 21st slave if you will, then at that point in time you would have lost the game. But we're going to be optimistic and let's focus on victory here. So this here is we need to free 22 slaves. And the way that works is we start off with slaves in these 3 plantations down here. And let me just zoom back a little bit first and show you the map. The map is divided into 2 separate regions. We basically have here the North Star, which is a kind of a newspaper, and that represents a lot of the political and fundraising agendas and things that you need to do during the game. And the map actually represents the doing, the action, the actual getting people from one point to the next. So both were equally important, obviously, for the Underground Railroad. You need money to make things happen. That was true then just as it is today. So when we start the game, we fill up all of the, we put slaves in all of the 3 plantations. And if you want a super challenging game, you can also add slaves to these brown cubes here as well. But again, this game is challenging enough, so let's just leave the slaves as it is. But then we also have over here, the way we're going to fill up slaves as the game goes along, you basically have the slave market, which is here. There are 8 cards in the slave market. You start with 3 flipped over, and you just fill up the spaces as need be. And as the game goes on, you flip over, you basically add slave markets as you go. So basically, they're going to go from the slave markets into the plantations, and then we got to move them up into Canada. And once we get them into Canada, well, woohoo, welcome to the Great White North, and you get to put the cube here and you get to tally them along. And as you follow along, you can see the numbers. We need to free again 22 slaves, so we need to fill all the boxes up to here, starting in these rows there. But that is only one thing that we need to do to achieve victory. The second thing we need to do to achieve victory is we need to actually raise the sufficient amounts of funds or support as we go along. So that takes us over to the left side of the board, or the political side of the board. And I want to draw your attention, basically, there's 3 columns here divided by different areas, or different eras, pardon me. 1800, 1839, 40 to 59, then 60 to 65. And you go from left to right in this particular case. And what you need to do is at the very, very top, you have what are called support tokens. And as you can see, a support token for each era is going to cost you $10. So at the first era, you have 4 support tokens. And again, this is for a 4-player game. I advise you to check out the table here on your handy rules summary, and you can see there's a little chart here for 4 players. It tells you how many support tokens you put for each era, as well as the conductor and fundraising tokens, which we'll talk about in a second. So we need to, before you can move from one era, you must, between you and your team, you must buy all of these support tokens, but at only $10 each. So the next question you ask is like, well, how the heck do I raise money in this game? So I'll talk about that in one second, but just as a recap, what you need to do then is you need to buy and purchase all of these support tokens, and by purchasing support tokens in one era, you get to move to the next era, and then from there you get to move to the next era. Once all of those support tokens have been purchased, and all of the predefined number of slaves that you need to free, and again in this game is 22, then and only then are you capable of winning the game. I don't say you win the game right away, because you still have to finish that round. If you finish that round and you don't lose your 21st slave, then you will win the game. So let's talk about how we can raise money. And the other thing I want to mention too is, just for those of you who kind of want to remember, if we zoom back out and we look at the board, all of the victory conditions that you need to achieve are basically on the, excuse me, on the north side of the board. So on the left side there, you see the support tokens right there. So you need to buy all of those, and just moving along the top side of the board, you need to free all of these slaves. And again, over here, you cannot lose more than the number of slaves defined on your card. So how do we raise money in this game? Well, let's go back and look at our tokens again. If we look at our tokens, you see that below the support tokens, we also have what are called conductor tokens. And these conductor tokens are essentially what helps you move your slaves on this side of the board. I'll talk about those in a second. But you have what are also called the fundraising tokens. And the fundraising tokens is a way for you to raise money in the game. And so in the first two eras, the fundraising token is the same. You basically what it gives you $1 for every slave that you have in a green occupied space. So if we look over here, you want to play a fundraising token, you can see you have a bunch of green occupied spaces in the south. So whenever you play that fundraising token, you simply count all your slaves in each of these spaces, and you're only allowed to have one slave per space on any space in the board, with the exception of the big cities, which are identified by these squares that go around them. And in those big cities, you're allowed to have 4 slaves. But going back to the southern spots, and just to let you know, there's actually only 10 of these spots. So the maximum amount of money you can raise with a fundraising token, especially in the first 2 eras, is going to be $10. So let's do the math here real quick. I did it for you. In a 4-player game, if we need to buy all of these support tokens, then all of these support tokens, that's a grand total of $120, as there's 4 support tokens here and 8 support tokens here. And then suppose we were super efficient and we were able to raise funds, the maximum number of funds for each one of these fundraising tokens in the game. That there's 4 fundraising tokens here and there's 5 fundraising tokens there. That's only $90 that we would raise in this particular example. That gives us a $30 difference between what we need to pay to get into phase 3 and what we actually have available through the fundraising tokens. So there obviously has to be other ways to get money. Well, there is. Each player starts with $8 as well, and that's true for any number of players. So I've set up 4 players, and you see I put $8 on either side. So in a 4-player game, that would be $32 that we'd start off with. Woohoo! So now we've made up that $30 deficit. Then we have $2 left to spare. Well, not so quick, because there's different things that actually cost money in this game, and I also need to mention that's going to require perfect planning on our side. Plus, you're not allowed to trade money in this game. Whatever you have is yours. So the likelihood of you being that good at your planning, not so good. The other thing I need to mention is, in order for us to move our slaves, we must buy these conductor tokens. And again, similarly, the cost of anything is indicated here by these yellow circles. So conductor tokens in the first era, there's only one conductor token type available, and it's going to cost us $2. So there's absolutely no way that you can raise the monies only through these fundraising tokens to advance your support. There has to be other ways. So this is what's going to cost us money to move our slaves. The other ways you can actually get money is on everybody's special role, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, is you can see that all the different roles have you get some money during the action phase. So don't forget about that. That's often forgotten. So that's another way to get money. Remember, during your action phase, you get $1 that way. The other ways to get money is you can actually pass during your action phase, and that's another way that's often overlooked. And that basically means during your turn you don't do anything, and you can get some money that way. And the other way you can get money is, if we go look at the board here, you can see that there's a lot of cities with a little money token on there. So if you move your slave into that city, you will get that money, that amount of money for you. So in some of these bigger cities, you get more money. So for example, you look at New York here, $3, Boston $2. So that's how you can get money. Okay, so enough about that. What else are we looking at here? We also see there's what's called abolitionist cards, and that's at the bottom stack here. Now, the abolitionist cards basically represent political things that have occurred, and some are good and some are not so good. And so let me just show you the 3 different types of abolitionist cards that actually exist in the game. The 10 abolitionist cards that you see here, these are just normal abolitionist cards, and basically I'm not going to go through each and every one of them, because they're really self-explanatory. So for example, you look at this one, you get to move 2 slaves, 1 space each. They do not trigger slave catchers, and you see here the slave catcher symbol has a little lock on it, indicating that they don't get triggered. So you know, you just go through each one of these. Are really self-explanatory. One thing I want to point out, the abolitionist cards are actually cards that actually, if you're playing less than 3 players, there's going to be some with this symbol on them, you know, 3 and 4. If you're playing 1 or 2 players, you take all of those cards out. That's one thing to keep in mind if you're playing with a different number of players. But so these 2 cards here are regular abolitionist cards. You see they're defined by their era, so you basically just separate them out by their era and shuffle them together. Then you have what are called the reserve abolitionist cards, and these are gray. Now the thing about the reserve abolitionist cards is once you purchase this card, you actually get to add it to your player area, and I'll talk about your player mat in a second. But if this is your player area, you see that you have there's a really nice order of play sequence in here that you can follow along, which makes it really, really simple for you to play the game and follow along your first time. But you also get a card that matches the card matches your mat, and basically tells you your different roles and your special abilities, because all the abilities are different between. There's 6 in the game, but you only play with 4. But you also see you got a space here, excuse me, for your reserve card. So if you were to purchase one of these gray cards, you put it right there, and then you would just basically read the text and you would apply it when and if appropriate. So that's the reserve cards. So these types of cards are actually generally quite beneficial for you, especially if you're played right. But then you also have what's called the these are the negative cards. These are the cards that basically impeded the abolitionist movement back then, and these are basically based on true events, and they're really quite interesting. But again, you just read these cards and you apply their effects. So this one here, it says, in effect until removed from the queue, cannot be purchased. So this is a real bummer. So as soon as this gets introduced into the queue, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a second, then basically you have to apply its effect all the time, and it's just awful. So you basically just read through all of those. And the other thing you'll note out that this negative card does not have an era associated with it. All of these other cards have an era associated with it. You know, here you got the earlier, middle, and later era. Whereas here, there is no era associated with it. The way that this works, again, and if you look at your handy-dandy player mat, is you're going to, in each of these eras, you're going to, based on the number of players, you're going to shuffle in some of these orange cards or these negative cards, and it tells you how many cards you shuffle in for each era. So for a 3 or 4 player game, which is what we're playing, I shuffled 4 orange cards into the first era, 5 in the middle era, and then 3 in the last era. So that's another thing that you'll need this for, and that's also player number specific. So those are the different abolitionist cards. So why don't we get to, I'll discuss very quickly your player mat, and then we can just go through the turn order, because that's usually the best way to teach this game and explain the game as we go along. So if we go to your player mats again, here we just got the stockholder. Here's my $8 that I started the game with. But everybody is going to have a special card, and at the top of the card, everybody gets money during the action phase. So it's going to get $1 during action phase. Don't forget this, because money is so tight in this game that that's very important. And then here's your special ability. Once per action phase, purchase a token after taking a fundraising action. So what that means is during your action phase, you can go back here and actually purchase a token, because these tokens that I've all described here are done during the planning phase. So this is another way to get at these tokens outside of the planning phase, and we'll talk about that when we actually go through the sequence of play. But then, what's really neat about each and every one of these roles, at the very bottom, it gives you a one-time ability. So here it says ×1, one-time ability during the game that you get to do. And this guy's special ability, the stockholder, he gets to, during your action phase, spend 3 tokens. And why that's so important is during your action phase, you're only ever allowed to spend 2 tokens. So when you start buying these tokens, you can only ever buy 2 at a time, and you can only ever use 2 in the same action phase. Where this guy, he's able to use 3. But once you do that, you flip the card over, and you see that now I don't have any more text on the bottom. I have lost that special ability, but some of his abilities have changed actually a bit. Now he gets $2 during the action phase, whereas before you saw he only got $1. So you know, that might be an improvement. And then he still gets to take that same special role that he has. So that's a special ability that, and everybody has one. I encourage you, you can just read through them. Beginning of the game, you can either shuffle these up randomly, or you can kind of choose one that fits your own personality. So it's kind of neat that way. So those are the player boards. So I think right now would be the best time just to very quickly go through the sequence of play, as I believe that this will be the best way to show the rest of the game. So the first thing that you're going to do is here I've set up the board, and here are all my slave catchers, and they're all different colors and shapes for those of you that are colorblind. And the way that you start and these are also the Kickstarter Chrome that I got with the game, so you might just have boring little pieces, but it doesn't change the gameplay at all. So sorry about that, but yeah, so I got I guess I paid extra money for some wood cylinders, so yay. So anyhow, you'll see that the slave catchers are all defined. They all have certain routes that they follow. So here the orange or the circular route, he basically follows this way, and his starting point is defined by his marker symbol in one of these cities. So similarly, that's how I set up all of them the same way, and that's where they start. So at the beginning of the round, and here again, you can just follow the order of play, we have the slave catcher phase. So that's these bad guys here. So what you do is you take these two slave catcher dice. One basically is a dice that indicates direction and speed, and so and I'll show that in a second. And then the other basically indicates the slave catcher that's going to be triggered. Should you roll this little guy here with his little hobo pack there and stick, that means no slave catchers are triggered. So you have a 1 in 6 chance of doing that. That is just great. I love that little luck component added to the game. So you roll this, and what this, well, wow, I'm doing really well. I guess my wife and I should start playing now because that's a great roll. But let me do it again. So you'd roll the dice, and here it tells you you have to roll the yellow or the triangle slave catcher, and he will move 3 spaces in the black direction. And the black arrows here are always pointed towards the east, and the white arrows are always pointed to the west. So he moves 3 spaces in the easterly direction. So here you just go 1, 2, 3, and that's where he would start that turn. So that's how simple it gets. That's the slave catcher phase. Then we have the planning phase. Okay, so in the planning phase, this is really quite cool because this is where you get to purchase these 3 types of tokens. Again, on the very top, your support tokens, which basically act as one of your victory conditions that you must achieve to win the game, and they cost $10 each. And in order to do that, you can decide who is in the best position to go do some fundraising with the fundraising tokens. And these are free, but I warn you, they are limited. When they are gone, they are gone. So you must be able to use these and maximize these the best. As you recall the example I gave you earlier, even these tokens by themselves, when used to their maximum benefit, don't quite get you to your goal that you want to. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But then you also have what are called the conductor tokens, and this is what allows you to move. So in the first era, all the conductor tokens are the same. And the way that they're shaped up is here it tells you can move 3 slaves, 1 space each. And so so you can buy these during your turn, and you got quite a few of these that you can buy. And what makes the conductor tokens unique during the game is you set up the pile so that the very last the bottom conductor token is gray. And this is special because when this conductor token has been used or purchased and then used in the game, it is returned back to the spot. So that conductor token will always be available for purchase. And whereas all the other tokens, they don't have that. When they're gone, they're gone. And all of the conductor tokens have that same gray on the very bottom. So this is the time where you can really start planning. Okay, well, I'll move some slaves. Why don't you work on our supports, and you can start doing this this type of thing. And once all of these support tokens are gone, there's 2 things that occur immediately. You're going to move to the next era, and the Abolitionist card deck, this card deck here, so this is the deck that you're using, is removed from the game. And then the next period is activated, so this period becomes activated, and then you would start refilling the Abolitionist card deck with the new stuff, and these tokens are now all available for purchase. And again, you can still get the old conductor token if it comes back, or any remaining tokens that were left there should you not have purchased them all. Again, except for these ones, because obviously they were purchased for you. So that's the planning phase. And what really makes this game awesome for me is this planning phase, and this is kind of a free-for-all, and you kind of decide who to do. In the rules, it tells you if you can't figure out who should get what conducting tokens, you just go in player turn order. That's bunk. If you're playing a co-op game with people like that, then you're probably not meant to be playing the right game. So you get to plan all of that, and so that's where you get your tokens, and again, you're limited to 2 tokens here. So after the planning phase, you will take up the action phase, and here you get to do a multitude of different things, and this is where actually the player turn order actually starts coming in, and some more Kickstarter Chrome. So we'll start here with this player, and the way that this works is you get to do a multitude of different things. First thing you get to do, and again we'll go to the conductor, is you go, now we're in the action phase, so you get your benefit here. So, and then you get to use this benefit here if you like. And this, for the conductor, you can move 2 slaves one space each during action. And this is also your time where it says during your action phase you can use your one-time benefit. So you can, all of these things are available to you until of course you use your one-time benefit and flip the card. So that's the one thing. The next thing you can do is you can play up to 2 tokens. So the way you can do this is, suppose you have, you have a movement token here. What this would allow me to do, and again, suppose I'm the conductor and we're just starting the game. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a buck. So imagine I took a buck. Woohoo! We're getting money. We're going to buy our support tokens. Then I can use my one-time benefit, or my actual benefit of the person. Move 2 slaves 1 space each during action phase. So I go down to my plantations, and now these cities here on the plantations, they basically represent this whole area. When you move, it's assumed that you're moving from this space. So I could move this person here, and what that's going to do, you see I've moved on to the actual brown slave catcher's route, so that would trigger him immediately. So he goes here. So he moves towards me, and then I could move this person. Let's move him up to here. Okay, so that was just my conductor's special benefits here. Now I can actually use these conductor tokens. And these conductor tokens, the only real thing you got to remember is that you cannot move the same slave with the same conductor token. So, and the way that these things work is really quite simple. Is you move a slave, and should he move to a space that gets money, you get the money first, and then you trigger the slave catcher. So let's use this conductor token first. I'm going to move this slave again. So I'm going to move him up to here. I'm allowed to do that because I'm using something different than how I moved him the first time. So I've moved him up to here. The first thing that happens is I get $2. So I go up to here, I get $2. And I give it to me. And the money, again, is player specific. But the next thing that happens is now I'm on the purple slave catching route. So the purple guy is going to move 1 step closer. So that's one guy. And then I can move a second guy, and then I can move a third guy this way. So that's this token. Now that I've used this token, it's gone. It's out of the game. So I go throw it off the box. And then now I can go through this token, and I can go, okay, this guy's going to move there. Let's move this guy up there. And again, so now that he's moved up to here, he gets $1, and that's always resolved first. And the reason why that's important, and then now the orange slave catcher comes 1 closer. The reason why that resolution, that order of resolution is extremely important is because you may end up sacrificing somebody to pull the slave catcher towards him, and to allow some other slaves to run free, and to pull them away and to let them run free. And while you're sacrificing that person, well, you might as well get some cash out of the deal. So you still do get that cash. That's one thing to do. And this is where I just kind of want to pause and take a moment. This is where normally I love it when mechanics and is integrated with the gameplay, when the theme is integrated with the mechanics and the gameplay. Whereas this is one game where I really have a hard time separating it, because every time I play, we really have a difficult time in losing that first slave. I mean, nobody wants to do it, because that represents a family. That represents, if you think of actually what this game obviously is all about, that really that represents, human life. And every time that we play this, that's always really, really hard for us sometimes to do something that's mechanically or strategically important to do in the game. But if you think about what that really meant during this time, it's really difficult for us to start filling up that card. And that's one thing that's a little bit of a hurdle to get over, especially if you're one that likes to get immersed in the theme of games. So I'll just kind of mention that. So anyhow, so you go through, and I haven't finished this turn yet, but you go through and you just need to, this is where you're moving your slaves on these conductor tokens. The thing to remember about these conductor tokens is as you get later on in the game, you're going to start seeing that you're going to have multiple, you can actually move slaves multiple spaces. So here you can move 2 slaves up to a maximum of 2 spaces. And one thing to remember about that is, suppose I wanted to move this slave, I can move through another slave. So I can move through here, and you only resolve your final destination. So if I moved all the way there, I'd get $1, and then the blue slave catcher would move 1 step closer. Now, slaves can move through other slaves, but you can never ever move through a slave catcher. They will catch you. So you cannot do that. So that's one thing to remember. And the other thing to remember is over here you actually have a spot where you need to pay. If you want to take a ride along the coast, you got to pay $1. and then you'd be on your boat, and then that gives you access to different spots over there as well. So those are the conductor tokens, and that's how you can move. And so during the action phase, the last thing that you can do, in addition to playing up to 2 tokens, and again, that would be a time when you would actually, play your fundraising token as well. And one thing I want to point out is in the last era, the fundraising token is different than the first 2 eras. Here you get $1 per slave in a blue city. So if we go to the blue cities, here we have Detroit. This is a blue city, as you can tell by its background, but it's not a big city. So here you can still only have 1 slave, whereas Chicago is a big blue city. You can have up to 4 slaves in here. And so you get $1 for every single slave in each one of those cities. So that's another way, and that's how this fundraising differs later on in the last stage of the game. So the last thing you can do in your turn is you can actually buy an abolitionist card. Now here I have not set out the abolitionist cards yet, but I'll set them out right now and I'll explain, because normally this is something that's done in the lantern phase or the final phase, but I'll do it right now just to show you. So basically you just fill up the abolitionist cards, and I've already explained what they are, and oh no, we already got a bad one, a red one in there. And so let's just keep flipping over the cards, because this is the current era that we're in. And I've got another red one. Now this is what another thing I want to discuss is when you buy an abolitionist card, the cost is up here above, so basically from $1 all the way to $3. But in this particular case, whenever you add new abolitionist cards, whether it be the beginning of the game or during the lantern phase, which I'll describe, is you can never add more than 1 negative abolitionist card, or opposition card, what they're called. You can never add more than 1 of those at a time. So since I was just filling this up and I added 2, there was already 1 in there, then I just set that aside. Then I pick up another card. Okay, good, this is a fine card. And then I would take this card here and I would just shuffle it back into the deck. So anytime you're adding new abolitionist cards, that is something that you must keep in mind. You can only ever add 1. So just to recap, that was our action phase, and again, everything here is labeled, and this is in turn order. You use your roll, you can play up to 2 tokens, you can buy an abolitionist card, and you can do these in any roll. And this would also be the time too where normally you would play your reserve card, because a lot of reserve cards, if I go here, are played during the action phase. So here, for example, during one of this player's action phases, and you just follow the read. So those are the things that you would do during your turn, and you can buy only 1 abolitionist card during the time. So after you're there, and then we go to after your action phase, we go to the slave market phase, and this is where we deliver slaves to the plantation. So here again, we have our slave market here. So here we have a bunch of new slaves. We have, how many are there? 8 slaves, and we have to put them all in open spots here. And this is one thing that I really, really like about this game over a lot of other cooperative games, is other cooperative games like Pandemic or Flashpoint, you never really know where the outbursts are going to occur. You might have for example, this was Pandemic, you might have a disease breakout here, and then depending on the card that you get, it may come back there, it might be over there, and so there's a little bit of luck based component to it. But here what's really, really cool is that puzzle building aspect of this entire game, because you always know where the slaves are coming, and you always know how many slaves are coming. So even when you're in your planning phase and you're starting to figure out who gets what tokens and who has the best roles to do different things, it's just becomes one big puzzle that starts unfolding. So even when you get to the action phase, you start working on that puzzle, and you're trying to get this spot ready for eventually when more slaves are added to the plantations to the south. So it's a known thing. You know what's coming your way. Everyone knows what each other's roles are. So it really, for me, it really adds so much more complexity and layers to the actual discussion. I mean, it's a much more richer discussion and thematic discussion of what you're going to do and how you're going to achieve the goals. Whereas in other games, other cooperative games I've played, and I'm kind of picking on things like Forbidden Desert, Forbidden Island, Pandemic, Flashpoint, all excellent games. I love them, but there's a little bit more luck in a luck component based on where the different things are going to start flashing out. Whereas here, you know exactly where it's going, so that's part of the puzzle. That's part of your discussion, and you know exactly what's coming your way. So that's one thing that I really, really like about this game. The other thing I want to point out, when you start feeling the The plantations, we left these brown spots open at the beginning of the game because we wanted to be easy. Here, they're available for you. They basically just add a little bit of extra slop for you at the beginning of the game. So this is the part where you could actually potentially lose slaves, because before, when we had our slave catchers moving, should a slave catcher move into a spot where your slave is, your slave is not lost right away. He does not go up to this card. Instead, he goes to the bottommost. He goes to the bottommost slave market card. And I guess that makes sense, because if you just escaped from some plantation, I guess back in that time you were considered somebody's property. And so if you go up, people are trying to protect their property or trying to protect their investments with these slave catchers. They're paid probably pretty good money by these guys down here. So if they're going to catch them, they're not going to just get rid of them right away. No, they go back to the slave market, and then they go back into the system, because it was an investment that these guys made back in the slavery time. But should a slave catcher go into a big city where you could have multiple slaves, then the way that would, I'm just kind of throwing this for example, the way that this works is, and again, in a big city you can have up to 4, then the way that this works is you take all the slaves and you just fill the cards, you put 1 in each card, and then you just cycle it around, and again you'd have a maximum of 4. So that's how the slave catcher fuse in a big city would work. So then you take all of these slaves and you move them to one of the 3 plantations. And if there is not enough space, if all of these spots are completely full, and imagine that they're all full, then and only then would you take the slaves that cannot fit in any one of these predefined boxes. You would put them up onto your slaves lost card, and that's how you keep track of them. So that's how it works. So a slave catcher doesn't immediately put your slave up there. He puts them back into the slave market, and during the slave market phase is where, in fact, you'll start losing your slaves. And this is also why it's so important when you play the game, if you have achieved both victory conditions, and again, that's buying all those fundraising tokens and also freeing your defined number of slaves into Canada, you still must play through the round, because you still are going to have this phase, because chances are you did all of that during your action phase. So you still must get through the slave market phase, because this is the point in time where your slaves are actually added to the slaves lost card. So that's a very, very important thing to keep in mind. And then again, remember that here, even if you had 20 slaves on there, you have not yet lost the game, but that 21st slave that does not have a space when he gets up there, then you have lost the game. So at that point in time, we go to the lantern phase, and we're almost done. So what you're going to do is you go to your abolitionist cards, and here, let me get these ones out of the way, and you can see that you take the rightmost card, and there's a little arrow out here. He just slides off if he's still there, and then everything else just basically slides down and fills up the space. In a 1 and 2 player game, you'd get rid of both of these. So here you got 1 and 2 player, you get rid of two at a time. So you get rid of those abolitionist cards, and again, there's some of these opposition cards, they say resolve when removed. So that's important to point out, because it doesn't matter how it's removed. If you removed it even by just sliding it off during this lantern phase, you still must resolve the card. So what's really, really cool about this card, though, about this game, is there's other cards out there that allow you to kind of manipulate these decks and change things a little bit. So if you look at one of these regular cards, the Liberator, place 1 card in the Abolitionist queue back on top of the current Ages Abolitionist deck. So you could imagine, and somebody might say, well, hey, wait a second, we don't want this effect to trigger right now. I'm going to buy this card. It's $1, and so you buy this card, and then and what you can do is then you can play this card and say, right, we're going to take this card, we're going to put it back on the deck because we're in this current phase, and then hopefully maybe you've planned that in a time such that somebody has bought the last fundraising token, and then this gets all trashed, and then that's a successful way of getting rid of that card. So there's a lot of really neat things here that really push this to an extra level of complexity above and beyond the pandemics and the flashpoints, because I kind of view what goes on here in this map as kind of the equivalent kind of stuff that goes on in Pandemic and Flashpoint, you kind of have bursts of things that you need to kind of manage. Whereas this whole card interaction and the different, and I guess and these different roles that these guys have and how they can manipulate both the tokens, the conductor tokens, fundraising tokens, and also by purchasing these cards, it just adds a whole new level of discussion and planning. And I just love the fact that we know what's coming our way, because that really influences the planning phase and your discussions and trying to figure out this one big intricate puzzle of, you know, all these moving parts, slave catchers moving, slaves being added, different cards that are going to affect different political events that have occurred that are going to affect your cause, either in a good way or in a bad way. And you must do this all in a very, very efficient way, as all of this stuff is very, very limited. So you have to really control and manage your resources, and especially your money. Money is tight, 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 and you need money to win the game, because you need money to buy those tokens, and you need money to move the slaves through your conductor tokens here, because they cost money as well. So that's generally the how to play. Hopefully this gets you started, and please stay tuned for my final thoughts. Let me just ask my wife real quick, does she have any other questions? No, she's nodding my head. I think I promised her 20 minutes. It looks like we're a little bit longer than that, but hopefully I'll get this game in after all. So thanks very much. Please stay tuned for my final thoughts. Cheers. Welcome back. So what did you think? Hopefully I can portray how the game is meant to be played, and if you had any outstanding rule questions, I sure hope that I addressed them. If not, just please leave a comment down below, and I would love to address them. But if not, I also see that Brian Mayer himself is extremely active on Board Game Geek, so if I don't get to it, I'm really hoping that he might drop by and clarify any rule misinterpretations that we may have got along the way. One thing I did want to point out for abolitionist cards: should you have had expansion abolitionist cards, the special ones, you do not add them to the decks, or the decks will become unbalanced. And this is, I read this on the Geek, you actually replace certain cards, and it's within your rule set that you have. So you replace the cards, and so you keep the card deck the same. So that's one thing that I didn't really dwell on in the overview, but hopefully the rest of it kind of came together. So what are my final thoughts on the game? What do I think about the game? Well, let me be very clear, first of all. My experiences with this game have been on both ends of my gaming spectrum, and let me describe both of them to you. The game that I won, so I've won this game on the easy, and a 4-player game, and it was just a really awesome night of gaming for me. I had 3 other guys together, and we played cooperative games together with these guys before, like all of us have played them together. And it was a real, during that planning phase, it was a real discussion. It was a really open dialogue about what's going on, who needs to do what. And one thing I really, really love about this game is because everybody has a variable player power, your roles allow you to do different things. And during your action phase, that's actually when the player turn order matters. So you kind of go through and you actually have to, basically have to set things up for the next guy in line behind you. So you go, well, this is my special ability, and sometimes you can't really take full advantage of it because he's not right in the proper spot in the turn order where you need him to be to get everything lined up so that person's power can really be utilized to its full effect. So you're always trying to manage that a little bit as well. And I was talking earlier before how I was really looking forward to the game Yido. Well, you also have the Watch Patrol and Yido, and you're always trying to manage that guy as well. Well, I found that within the action phase here, the turn order coupled with the variable player powers that you have really changed the dynamics of the puzzle. The puzzle was always kind of moving around on you a little bit. Plus the fact that you, and I mentioned this before in the video, the fact that you know where your bursts of stuff are going to occur. You know where the slaves are going to be introduced. You know how many are coming your way, and you know where they got to go. So you know the problem is well defined, the area is well defined. So then when you have a group of people who are really engaged in that dialogue and spend a lot of time in that planning phase talking and re-talking and discussing, it is just fantastic. And so I highly, highly recommend it with that particular group. Another group that I played it with, there wasn't a lot of dialogue going on in the planning phase. It was very individualistic, and it was difficult to kind of plan. It was people were basically saying nobody wanted to be the alpha player, and I think there's a little bit of a hesitancy, so nobody wanted to be the alpha player, so they basically say, well, do whatever you want, without really opening up the discussion. Whereas and we lost horribly in that game. I didn't really enjoy it that much. I didn't have a great experience with that. So if you're playing with people like that want to discuss and really get into the meat of it, then you're going to have an awesome time trying to unravel all the different layers of this puzzle and trying to piece it together. And just as soon as you think you got one little bit pieced together, well, then you go into the next round, the action, the player turn order changes, and then you got to kind of twist your thinking a little bit on it, or you have a new opposition card that comes through and really throws a wrinkle into things, and you're always trying to massage and manipulate and change your way and conform to the new way that this puzzle has morphed itself every round. And it's just a really enriching experience, and I highly love it, and recommend it, especially if you have a group like this. So don't be afraid of that alpha player. I don't see it happening. I see that alpha player happening if you're not willing to discuss, but you have a bunch of people willing to discuss, but basically a bunch of A-type personalities anyhow, it just turns into a really deep, insightful conversation and an awesome gaming experience. And with 4 players, I enjoy it because there's so many variables that you feel that even if you think you're screwed, you go, no, there must be another way. Let's think about this again. And you know, circle the wagons and do it all over again. Right now, 2-player games playing with my wife, oh my goodness, the game just goes too fast. It just goes, and so sometimes you go, we're screwed. Well, no, surely we can't be screwed. No, we're screwed. And so sometimes it goes by a lot faster, and it's a different feel for me. So for me, the sweet spot is definitely 4 because it just really brings in that discussion. But it's 4. The sweet spot is 4 with really engaged individuals, people that you want to play with. So if some people are tired and not really feeling it, I don't recommend this game. If you guys are engaged and want to kind of have a really time figuring out a puzzle, fantastic. Highly recommend Freedom, the Underground Railroad. And the reason why I play games is for discussion. Any game that I play is to promote discussion points. So this game definitely does that because it promotes discussion and trying to solve the puzzle. If you're just treating this basic as strict mechanics, strategy, gameplay, there's a lot of discussion and trying to solve the puzzle. And if you're treating this as you want to get immersed into the theme, and this is definitely a very real theme to a lot of people. And in fact, I should point out that this game has not been met with open arms by some people I normally game with, and I can basically say, like, some people, they want to play games because they want to escape reality. They want to get into a different world. Same reason why you might watch a movie, for example. And this, for some people, is a little too real. And so it's hard for them to kind of break the tie between, well, this is a gameplay and this is a part of history and this is something that should be discussed, versus maybe just letting their mind not be burdened with, the heavy thoughts, on a Saturday night of something like this. So, to each their own. Myself, I think it's great because of all the text that's in there. I'm learning more about this era than I had before, and I think that was the point, because with Brian, I believe that this game ties into some of the curriculum, maybe grade 11, I think, in the States. I'm not exactly sure. But you can start talking about the Underground Railroad, and it provides a whole new level of discussion. So you're not only discussing the game, but you're discussing real events, real people. There's real abolitionist cards in there. And so the discussion that comes out of this game is just so rich and so rewarding, and it's just like, it just blows up. And even when you're done, I find myself, I'm thinking about this game a lot. Not so much about the mechanics of it all, but just thinking about this time in history. And it's made me a lot more curious and wanting me to learn more about this time in history. So this is, for all of those reasons, if any of that strikes a chord with you, then I'd highly recommend that you get this game and have a good look at it and play it. And please, if you're turned off or a little bit intimidated by the theme, I shouldn't say turned off, but if the theme kind of pushes you away a little bit, the gameplay should pull you right in, because the gameplay itself, again, it's a very puzzly game with lots and lots of layers that you need to figure out how they all kind of work together. Player roles, the cards, the timing of when you can do certain things, the slave catchers, and it's a real seesaw. It's a real seesaw kind of mechanic, because you move a slave up this way and the slave catcher goes this way, but then by doing that, it might open up a gap here, so this slave can burst up on this side and moves the slave catcher back, and meanwhile this guy scurries up this way, and you're trying to basically, like, I'm over here, I'm over here, I'm over here, and as you're doing that back and forth, you're trying to slip these guys all the way around, and it's just really, really cool. But there's certain abilities that allow you to kind of freeze things, so when you get to a point where, like, oh my goodness, we're going to lose, there's no way we can do this, but then you can get another special ability that may freeze your slave catchers for one turn or whatever it might be, and then whoo, we got new life and off you go. So for all those reasons, I really enjoy this game. I'm trying to think of what else that I wanted to talk about in my final thoughts, but I'm sure it'll come to me. I could talk about this game for a very long time, but I hope that this Avoid the Rules has helped you make an impression of the game and also understand the rules. And please, if I sometimes I talk too fast for my brain, and which my wife says gets me in a lot of trouble all the time. But basically, if I got something a little bit wrong or I misworded something, please leave a comment below. I really enjoy the comments. And if you like this review, please come find me on YouTube or on Facebook. It's on Facebook, I'm Connect More Board Games, or on YouTube, I'm sure if you do the same, you might be able to find me. And as always, I'm here in Board Game Geek, and I really encourage your thoughts and in your comments, and I'm really glad that you took the time to watch the video. And here it is again, Freedom, the Underground Railroad by Brian Mayer. Great cooperative game, puzzle game that if you want to get immersed into a theme or just immersed into a great game, here it is. Freedom, the Underground Railroad.